the Informative Fisherman here, and today I want to talk about spotted bass. I'm calling this video Spotted Bass 101. I've watched some other videos out there on it, and I've been fishing them for years with my buddies, and I'm just like, some of these videos out there are not very explanatory and miss some of the key features and kind of segment them into an awkward category, which I don't really agree with. So basically what I want to do today is explain what a spotted bass is, when to fish for them versus a smallmouth or a largemouth, how to target them better, and a little bit more about their behavioral patterns, what they prefer to eat, how to pick out bigger ones versus smaller ones, and the different strains we have. I live in Northern California. We have Alabama strain spotted bass in some of our lakes, and we have Kentucky, which is the northern strain spotted bass. The northern Kentuckys tend to be a little bit smaller than the Alabama strain or the Coosa River strain, but we never got those Coosas in California. We did get the Alabama, and we do have Kentucky. This is why some of our lakes you'll see these giant spotted bass, and some of our other ones you'll see all these tiny spotted bass when the same forage base is there. So let's get started with that.
Ultra hog. Wow, ultra hog, 1/4 ounce jig head.
That was a good fish.
Yeah, he was just coming up nice and easy.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That's a great spot.
Yep. Magno spot. Spotopotamus. There we go.
Nice.
Now they're showing up. Oh yeah. There we go. On that little ultra hog. Look at that. Right through the nose. A little Biwa ultra hog. A couple of years ago, Vince, the owner of Biwa, he came out from China and was showing me this bait, and I'm like, that's too small for out here. But now, it makes perfectly good sense with spotted bass. We'll take it.
So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put an illustration up of a spotted bass on the screen. Now there's 3 primary tournament species of bass. That's your largemouth bass, your smallmouth bass, and your spotted bass. And all your FLW, all your opens, your Bass Masters, these are the 3 bass that you can legally weigh in. And so these are the 3 common, most targeted species of bass. But the spotted bass is often mistaken with a largemouth bass. Now there's some key differences. The big ones start clearly looking more like a football. They have a smaller head. Their mouth is much smaller than a largemouth bass, although the color pattern's relatively the same, whitish green with a dark lateral line on the side. What you're gonna notice a lot of the time with a spotted bass is his mouth is so much smaller than a largemouth, and yet the bottom of the jaw does not protrude past the eye. A largemouth's jaw go way past his eye, and the mouth is so much larger. Also on the spotted bass, if you open up their mouth, there's a rough patch. It's like 3 or 4 teeth right in the center of their tongue. It's super obvious. If you lip them and you put that thumb right on their tongue, you'll feel it. The largemouth has none of that there. The spotted bass does. Also, below the lateral line on a spotted bass, you'll also see black splotches or big black check marks on their whiter belly. The black check marks are more of a sign of a mature spotted bass. A lot of the time the juveniles look remotely similar to the largemouth bass, but the juveniles sometimes will have a little bit of orange or a little bit of red near the tip of their tail, so that's a little easier way to tell. But that rough patch on the tongue is pretty much a dead giveaway of a spotted bass. You can also look at the dorsal fin, but when a spotted bass gets huge, the dorsal fin looks remarkably similar to a largemouth. The largemouth, the front part of the dorsal fin and the back part of the dorsal fin usually meet the back. In regards to a spotted bass, usually they don't quite meet the back and the middle, they still connect, but when a spot gets really big, they look more like a largemouth. So focus on the teeth on the tongue and that much smaller jaw not protruding past the eye.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. That's a much better one. Okay. Got a real one. Hey. Matt, you're good. You're good. Good Lord. Good Lordy. Good Lordy. Spotopotamus. Oh God, he's digging. Get out of there. Chime! Yeah. You go ahead and put her in the box, Travis. Thank you, sir. You're too kind. You're too kind.
On that little Ned rig, huh?
Little Ned. Good old little Ned doing the job.
Yeah, buddy. It's a good spot.
So when do you target spotted bass versus smallies or largemouth? Now, naturally, spotted bass tend to be the smaller of the three species, but in that regard, sometimes they're bigger in the lakes than the smallmouth, or there is no smallmouth there, or they seem to be equal to the same size as the largemouth in some lakes, or they're the majority of the species, or it's wintertime where spotted bass are a lot easier to catch than the other two species. So in that regards, if the lake is primarily spotted bass and you're fishing a tournament, or if you're fishing for fun, you may want to focus on catching 4 spotted bass or 3 and looking for 2 kicker largemouth or 2 kicker big smallmouth, unless the lake has giant spotted bass. Through the months of November to February, spotted bass are opportunist feeders. They're going to adjust to the bait fish, to the forage base. They're going to follow them around. If you generally find the bait in a lake that has spotted bass, they will be there before the largemouth, before the smallmouth. They're willing to travel and follow that bait through the winter months and still remain schooled up. So in the winter months, you have a much higher odd of catching spotted bass, a lot easier than you do the smallmouth and the largemouth. And also those bigger spotted bass tend to follow and become a little bit easier to target along with those schools. The bigger ones like to kind of wolf pack. Some of them do their own thing, but usually you'll find those real big ones in like 3 to 4 or 5 of them at a time, versus the bigger schools of like those 2-pound and under. You can find spots in 100+ schools of fish, even a few hundred at times. So remember that. They're easier to target in the winter. They're generally in schools, to where if you find a school of those, you may be able to get your limit fast. If they're the majority of what's in the lake, but you know a big largemouth is available, maybe you catch 3 or 4 of those and then target a big largemouth. So you have opportunities with the spotted bass either to get limits fast, or if you find the bait and you see bigger arches nearby, more than likely they're spotted bass if it's the colder months. So you might want to try tactics for targeting them at that point. Or if you live in Northern California or one of those places that produces these giant spotted bass, focusing on those primarily and ditching the other 2 species, because you could weigh a huge limit of giant spotted bass.
He's gonna come back up front.
Don't break off.
Oh, I won't break off.
That's a good decision. That was a good move. Solid. That's 2-pound test. That's fine.
That's probably the biggest one I caught today, though.
No, he's a good one though. He's 2¼ pounds.
So where do you target a spotted bass? Now, spotted bass in lakes tend to live much deeper than the other 2 species, but from time to time they do cross paths, and a lot of times spots will come shallower. In a river, they're going to be shallow, just like the other 2 species. One of the key differences between where you would find a largemouth versus where you would find a spotted bass is the spotted bass tend not to like shallow, grassy, muddy areas. They're much more like a smallmouth in that regards. They like rock, they like cleaner water, they like current. They love current. Sometimes they'll behave like a trout. You'll see them in those rivers with that hard current sitting right behind a boulder or in the bottom of a hole picking off bait. But in regards to a lake, they're going to usually be near the river channels if your lake has one, and those steeper, faster drop-off ledges, or out on a main point where there's boulders. The lee side of the lake, that means the windier side of the lake, is going to tend to hold more spotted bass. It creates more current with the wind breaking on that bigger rock, and with that more current, the spotted bass love to frequent those areas. Also, with that lee side of the lake being in mind, it blows a lot of bait in there, and the spotted bass follow the bait year round. You're not going to find spots in the same spot over and over and over again. I've caught spotted bass 90 feet deep along floating seawalls in Table Rock Lake. I've caught them in 20-foot deep rock piles and Lake Comanche and Bullard's Bar and Folsom Lake, all over the place. They're going to be in a different location every time because they're going to follow the bait. So if you caught spotted bass in one area and you go out there the next time, don't really expect to always find them in the same spot. They're going to bounce around. They love like those humps that are out on the main lake. If you find a 20 or 30 foot deep hump out in the middle of the main lake, spots love to pull up on places like that and feed. They're opportunists. If there's gobies, if there's shad, if there's whatever the forage base in your lake, crawfish, they're going to go there, they're going to clean them out, and they're going to go find another area with more of that. They're constantly on the roam. So if you pull up to an area in your graph and it's 20 or 30 foot deep and you don't see them, but yet you're like I'm gonna make a few casts, make a couple. If you don't get bit, get out. They're a lot less selective in regards to what they'll eat. If you get a bait that looks remotely similar to what they're eating in front of a spotted bass, they are going to eat it way more often than a smallmouth or a largemouth would. So it's really about covering water until you find those fish. Don't think you need to be super patient when it comes to spotted bass. That's generally not the case. And also, recheck your spots. If it's a deep wall with wind on it and a ledge and you've caught them there before, don't show up first thing in the morning and say they're not there and never go back that same time. They will travel all around. They'll move up and down hundreds of yards and come back. They could be pushing a ball of bait out and around and come right back to it. I've had that 20 or 30 times in my lifetime where I came back an hour later and then I looked on the graph and it was stacked. So with that in mind, you need to keep this concept that you're going to see a few big arcs on the bottom, and those could be your bigger spotted bass, could be largemouth, but the few big arcs tend to be your bigger spots. Your bigger spots kind of run in those wolf packs, like I said earlier, 3, 5, 6, 7, maybe even 10, and then your smaller spots tend to be in larger schools. And their position is how you're going to select a bait, and we'll get into that next.
Hang with us, guys. We'll be right back. Bigger, better, badder. The evolution of the buzzbait is upon us. The Evolution Baits Grass Burner is a high-performance bass snatcher machine. High-end components, inline displacement, larger profile, balanced body for fast or slower retrieves, better deflection, and oversized treble hooks. You wouldn't bring a slingshot to a gunfight, would you? Find out more at evolutionbaits.com. Attention Northern California anglers, have you been to Boat Country in Escalon with one of the largest selections of welded aluminum fishing boats from North River, Hughes Craft, and now Crestliner? Chances are they have the right boat for you. And did I mention they have a full service center to take care of all your repair or boating maintenance needs? If you're a boat owner or just looking to become one, you owe it to yourself to check these guys out. Visit BoatCountryUSA.com or stop on by. We'll see you there. Ever tried pulling a planer board next to your boat when trolling or fishing from a swift current bank? If not, you're missing out on one of the most phenomenal fish catching machines on the market today. With Yellowbird planer boards pulling your lines perpendicular to your boat, you can't help but catch more fish. Find out more by visiting www.yellowbirdproducts.com. Did you know that P-Line makes specialized lines for all your fishing needs? From the super strong abrasive resistant CXX or the low stretch super stealthy CX Premium, or maybe you're looking for invisibility or super bite detection with P-Line's 100% fluorocarbon. No matter what your needs, P-Line's got it covered. To find out more, visit P-Line.com.
P-Line, baby.
Hey guys, did you know that yours truly is now hosting Lucky Tackle Box's monthly panfish instructionals? And aside from relentless fish catching, I'll be breaking down the rigging and the gear you need to get going along the way. And of course, a few extra tips to help you score more fish on the goodies included in your box. So remember, the tug is our drug. So go visit LuckyTackleBox.com and get signed up today. Oh, you heard they got weapons of big fish destruction? Well, you heard right. BWA Fishing Performance is the newest company hitting the U.S. market by storm. With some of the sickest swim baits around and non-cookie cutter style lures that you could ever get your hands on, it's time to show these fish something new. Visit BWA.com.
Things getting crazy. Dude, he's wanting to fight now.
Never say die.
Uh-huh. These things have no give up in them, man. Spotted bass are brutes. A little tanker.
Yeah, that one is fat, man. Look at that thing. Look at the size of their belly. These things are all thick. The size of their shoulders. It's like 3 inches across. Crazy. That Ned rig's working out. Second Ned rig fish.
Now I've seen information out there that says these are your top 5 spotted bass baits. Don't ever think that there's a top 5 for anything. I know I've said it in regards to largemouth. If you're going to go out to a pond, 5 baits you should have with you, and that does apply. But spotted bass are opportunist feeders. They're going to eat what is there in front of them. They're going to strike at big baits. They're going to strike at small baits. But that being said, you have to remember they have a smaller mouth. So if you're using like a bait with a single hook, you may not want to go over like a 1/0 or a 2/0 hook. You want to make sure they can get that hook in their mouth. That being said, you may be throwing a big top water, okay? And you're like, wow, a 2-pound spot. He may not be able to come up and eat that 5-inch bait on top right there, but that's where you want your treble hooks. If you're using a larger bait, like a buzz bait, in targeting spots, you may want to try something like the Evolution Baits Grass Burner that has 2 treble hooks, because a spotted bass will come up and grab a fish or something off the surface. You got to remember, if it's softer, they can choke it down into that smaller mouth. But if you have a hard bait, a bigger bait, a single hook's usually not the best bet with spotted bass. You want to use treble hook baits if they're larger. Just like this example, look at the size of this spoon right here. This is a pretty big spoon. For them to engulf that whole entire spoon and get it with a single hook, it's probably not very high, versus like a largemouth could easily get it and suck the whole thing in. Spotted bass has a smaller mouth, so that's where you'd want something like treble hooks with round bend hooks, which have a higher hookup ratio. So when you're targeting spotted bass, they can be shallow, they can be super deep, they can be suspended. In the summertime, in those warmer months, they'll be right in the middle of the water column. The water stratifies. You ever heard that terminology of a thermocline, where the water's too hot right here? On the bottom, there's not enough oxygen, but there's that just right section. I call it the baby bear, when it's just right. That little thermocline section in the middle of the water in the summertime, you'll get out there, you can turn your fish finder on, you can turn your power up, turn your sensitivity up, and you're gonna see that area that looks like a cloud in the middle of the screen, and that's the thermocline. And that cloud is zooplankton, it's phytoplankton being eaten by zooplankton. Phytoplankton is just algae. Zooplankton is the microorganisms that eat that, and therefore the minnows eat that, and the spotted bass are going to be in there eating those minnows and eating those shad. So this is like one of those times in the summertime you could be fishing for suspended fish. Suspended just means they're in the middle. They're suspended between the top and the bottom. And this is where you're going to have to throw things like an Alabama rig. This one's broken right here, but I just set a recent lake record on this. You guys will see all that footage. Jerk baits sometimes will get down deep enough to catch those suspended fish, sometimes not. Spoons, like a flutter spoon, letting that fall. Let's say the fish are down 30, 40 feet. Make a 50-foot cast and hold a tight line and point your rod at it and let it swing through there, and it is bound to reach that area where you see those suspended fish on your graph. You can vertically jig something like a laser minnow. Drop it down to 30 feet. If you see them, drop it down to 50 feet and jig it up and down and catch them at that point. Little hand pour swim baits like this can work substantially well. Once again, you can see right here, this is a 2/0 hook right there. It's not very big. I want to make sure that they get it. Also, spotted bass have like an affliction for chartreuse. Some days they just won't hit the chartreuse, but other days, anything with chartreuse on it, they'll pounce all over it. Andrew Upshaw talked to me about that. He's a FLW tour guy. I'm sure you guys have heard of him. But he's a big advocate of a chartreuse head on a swim bait for spotted bass. And you can also count that down and fish it in that zone. Spin baits like this here also work really, really well. Super subtle, have a nice body roll to it. It's a hard bait, little prop on the front, little prop on the back. You can count these down and slow roll them through that strike zone. But if you see those fish at 30 foot deep, usually they're not going to come up and eat a topwater. If they're within 10 or 15 feet of the surface, they will. They'll come up and get that at that point. If you have them on rocks in shallower water, of course you can crank them with a shad looking crankbait like this. It's a pretty large crankbait for spotted bass, but it's got treble hooks, so you'll still catch them. When they're associating to the bottom, when spotted bass are not focused on shad, not focused on minnows, they're usually focusing on gobies or crawfish. And little things like shaky heads, this little tiny biwa armor craw right here on a frenzy nail, or a little ball head jig with like a little 3 or 4 inch worm can work substantially well. That's a little 1/0 light wire, 1/4 ounce ball head right there. Catch tons of spotted bass on a setup. This is also referred as a Ned rig. I want to go ahead and talk about that for a second. Ned rigs are basically just an exposed hook on a ball head jig or any sort of little tiny jig head, like an oversized crappie jig head. If it's a ball head, if it's a darter head, and you have a small plastic on there, Ned rig was a term that was kind of associated with that now, and now that's like the go-to term, Ned rig. But guys have been fishing it way before anybody ever called it a Ned rig, ball head jig, darter head jig, just a little tiny jig with an exposed hook and a little plastic. The little Biwa Ultra Crawl, I've got a ton on this. It looks just like a goby in that green. And what you want to pay attention to, if you catch a spotted bass and you put them in the live well, they're gluttons. If you caught them, they were usually up feeding, and a lot of the time they'll spit up a crawdad, they'll spit up a goby, they'll spit up a shad. A lot of the time, if you caught a shad eater, they spit them up on the way up to the boat. you'll see that glitter of the shad scales in the water, and that'll tell you right away, hey, maybe I need to be fishing a shad pattern. Even if you caught them up shallow, you may want to put a bunch of swim baits on an A-rig like that, or slow roll this along the bottom. Let's say you're in 15 foot of water and you caught one and you seen it spitting up shad, and you're like, well, I thought he was shallow, I thought he was eating crawfish, I thought he was eating gobies, but he spit up shad, so you might want to switch to that shad pattern to catch more at that point. But keep it in mind when you're selecting baits that you want to be in their target zone. If it's a bigger bait, you want treble hooks. If it's a smaller bait, you want a single hook or treble hooks. Don't think necessarily that a big bait catches a big spot. It works sometimes, but a big spotted bass, you take a 5 or 6 pound spotted bass, his mouth is the same size as a 2 pound spotted bass. They get that big football shape to them. And trust me, they're eating more. They are gluttons. They're not like a largemouth where they're gonna look to eat every couple of days and a whole trout. That does happen on rare occasion, but more often those big spots are eating just as often as those smaller spots, which is kind of cool, and that's why you can catch those big ones in the wintertime. But keep that bait choice in mind, guys. You need to be paying attention to what you think they're eating. When that water gets into the low 40s, the shads start to die off. They may eat crawfish. They're much more likely to eat a bottom bouncing bait like these here. When that water's in that 60 to low 50s, a lot of the time they're gonna be focusing on bait fish. So, with all that said and done, let's talk about the spawn and the target zone.
It's good. Fast head shakes. Oh yeah. Wow. Oh, huge spot. Okay, I'm gonna need that net back there. Yes! Oh, the hook came out. That's a 3.5, 4 pounder right there. Big spot. Big spotopotamus. 3 pounds, 3.25. Yeah, that's more like it. Offshore humps out here on Lake Comanche. Incredible what you can find. Yes. We'll see. I love that.
You gotta make sure you flex your forearm when you're like that.
Yeah, that's what we've done, so I've been trying to
to
go back and watch. I got it on my, I'll be able to check it on here too, Gus. On your phone? No, my watch. Oh.
He's coming to you. Oh, that's a good one. That's a real good one. Come on, Opotamus.
So like, I can go back and look on Google Earth and click my shit on Google.
Oh!
So I'll see really zigzags everywhere.
Oh, that's legit. That's legit right there. Yeah. That is a 3+. Oh yeah.
3.5.
Spotopotamus right there. Lake Comanche. Spotto.
So you're going to see a lot of information that's going to contradict what I'm going to say right here, but I've talked to anglers like Matt Frazier, I've talked to anglers like Greg Gutierrez, I've talked to spotted bass specialists, okay? And we all tend to agree on this same subject, that spotted bass will literally start spawning January, February. And this is before. It generally goes from spotted bass, smallmouth, largemouth in the spawn category. Now, a spotted bass will tend to spawn a little bit deeper. They're similar to smallmouth in this case, that they'll spawn a little bit deeper, and usually because you find them near those rocky banks and not near the shallower mud. So I find spotted bass spawning from 20, 25 to as shallow as like 8 to 5 feet. That's usually real shallow for them. They're not like a largemouth where they're going to spawn up in 6 inches in a foot of water sometimes. They're going to tend to be deeper. So a lot of people don't notice them on beds when that, you know, that water's still in the low 50s. Those largemouths start moving up and roaming to make beds around 58. We've seen it done with spotted bass, you know, 52 degrees, almost as cold as it gets is almost when they start. I've seen some spawning in January, but basically if you start looking around February, and if you start targeting that 10 to 15, that 10 to 20 foot depth range, and in the pre-spawn for those spots, you can bounce a crankbait off the bottom. You got plenty of crankbaits out there that'll run that deep. Jigs work great around that time. You can even work a topwater over if it's the pre-spawn, because those spots are aggressive, and catch them. But there is going to be spots that are going to be deeper in the wintertime, okay? And there is going to be those some that start to move up to spawn, and of course those are going to be your bigger ones. When it comes to bass fishing, the bigger of all three of the species, smallmouth, spotted bass, largemouth, the bigger ones tend to spawn before the smaller ones. So this is where a lot of people kind of miss the boat on that, and they think, okay, we're going to go when the majority of the fish are spawning. But you don't realize those giant ones tend to move up early. So if you're looking to catch big spotted bass, target that 10 to 15, maybe pushing 20 range from February to March, and more than likely you're going to stumble into a much bigger one than you ever have. But don't necessarily think you need to go big bait, big fish in regards to spotted bass. Stay on the move, look on your graph, make a few casts. If you don't get them, get on to the next spot and find these fish.
Like a big one. It's a big one there. Get him, Aaron.
Like a big one, bro.
Circling. You got two? Oh! Oh, God damn. Oh, I guarantee it's at least 5. Oh, man.
God, he wasn't going nowhere.
No, it wasn't coming off anytime soon.
Oh, Jesus.
Look at that bitch, dude.
Smoked it, dude. Yeah, buddy.
That's gonna call one out. Oh yeah, dude. I think she may have beat the other one. Oh, damn. I think she might have that other one in there, B.
Get you some of that.
Okay, I want to talk about equipment used, the rods, the reels, the line. When you think of spotted bass, I want you to think that you're going to have to be fishing deep from March to November. March through November, you're usually fishing deep. The shallower ones are usually mid-November through February. Sometimes into March, they're going to be a little bit shallower. But so in those months where they're going to be a little bit deeper, you're going to see spinning rods being used way more often than casting gear. And the reason for it is you can drop a little jig down deeper. You can cast out, leave your bail open. If you see those fish at 50 feet deep, it's way more difficult to get there on a bait caster than it is a spinning setup. Okay, you're going to cast out there, you leave your bail open, let your line fall all the way down. You don't want it penduluming back to the boat. If you shut your bail too early, the line's going to swing back to you. And it's really nice for throwing lighter baits much farther away, like a little spin bait like that. You can cast it a lot farther on a spinning outfit versus a casting gear on a lighter lure. So deeper, farther, smaller, your spinning outfits are going to be your deal right there. Now, during those shallower times when you have fish moving up. Right now it's December. I just broke Lake Comanche spotted bass record with a 602, and I did it on a casting setup throwing a Alabama rig. Now the reason why is we found the majority of our bigger spots right now in December from 15 to 20 feet. That being said, they were still near the bottom. There was a feeding mixture of, they're feeding on shad, they were feeding on gobies. There was a in between. So what we did is we casted our Alabama rig, let it fall all the way to the bottom. We watched our line real close. Boop, you can see it hit the bottom. One hop, and we slow rolled it right along the bottom. Now, that's fine. 15, 20 foot deep, you could still fish that depth pretty easily. But if you're at 30, 40 feet deep, I would have to open my clutch up and feed off a bunch of line to let it get down there. Still possible, not as easy. You know, if they were on smaller bait, I wouldn't be able to make the long distance cast on my heavier setup. But since I was throwing an Alabama rig, this happens to be the G-Funk G rig right there, it was easier because it was a heavier setup. I had multiple swim baits on there. If I'm throwing a top water, sure, of course, throw it on casting gear. A crankbait, sure, a little heavier, I can throw it on casting gear and fish it a little bit shallower. Now, when it comes to spotted bass fishing, unless I'm fishing top water, 99% of the time, it's 100% fluorocarbon. The reason why is they tend to be deep. They tend to be around rocks. You need to be able to feel when you're on the bottom. Generally, they're in clear water to where they can analyze your line. They get up close and see if something's real. They got big eyes. They'll get down there in the clear water and they'll analyze. So 100% fluorocarbon is very, very low stretch, and it's virtually invisible under the water. You're going to feel the bottom a lot better. You're going to feel when you get down to those greater depths, you're going to feel that you're in contact with the bottom. If you put out a 120 foot of line and you have a line with a lot of stretch, you may not be able to set the hook on a thicker diameter hook because there's so much stretch. You might have to go to a super light wire hook like that to even set the hook, but 100% fluorocarbon, still very low stretch, and you're going to be able to get those hookups deeper, farther, and in cleaner water. That being said, with my casting setup, it doesn't really matter the line. The bigger the bait, of course, you're going to want to use heavier line. The lighter the bait. When I'm fishing like a Ned rig or a shaky head, I'm generally fishing on 6 to 8 pound fluorocarbon. Those are my common choices. If you're a very experienced fisherman and you're familiar with really utilizing your drag, and I'm going to show you something here. If you utilize your drag real well, fish 6 pound, you're going to get a couple extra bites throughout the day. Your bait's going to move more naturally and more subtly and look more realistic the lighter the line. The heavier line you use is going to kind of take a lot of the action out of your lighter little finesse baits like this. But 6 to 8 is good. Now, that being said, spotted bass pull very, very hard. I tell everybody a 5 pound spotted bass will tow a 10 pound largemouth backwards all day long and not even realize he's doing it. That being said, when you're on spinning gear, you need your drag set pretty darn light, okay? Spotted bass have a tendency of, when you first hook them, they make a run. They'll come near the boat, and as soon as they see light or near the boat again, they make a vicious, vicious downward run. And honestly, most people lose spotted bass once they get near the boat because they make that vicious run and their drag's too tight. So back off your drag, set your drag a little bit lighter, take your time. These fish are gonna pull extremely hard.
Giant. Will you let me rig up my A-rig?
Sorry, Matt.
Ah!
Huh? Swing. That's a spot. That's a spot. No, it's 15 pounds. That's a spot. That's a giant spot. Yeah! Yeah!
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, do it.
Unbelievable, guys.
I'll
Look at
grip
that
from
thing.
here.
Look at this. You can't go anywhere hardly in the world and catch spots like that. It's unbelievable.
8 pound largie.
Sneak under you.
4.5 pound spotted bass.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, another good one. Oh God, giant spot! Giant spot! Yeah! I think that spot goes 5.5, 6. Oh man, maybe I'm just overly anxious. I want that to be 5.5, 6. Woo! Yeah! Yeah, man!
I cannot believe this thing you hooked that one. Oh.
5 pounds, 11 ounces. We're gonna register this as the lake record, and unless we get a bigger one shortly.
One little side tip I would like to add, let's say you're casting a jig out and here's a rock wall and you pull up, here's the water going under, here's the rock wall, and you pull up in your boat and you're casting along this rock wall. Well, the spotted bass could be anywhere along that contour. There can be boulders going out. If you're positioned over deep water, casting to shallow and dragging your jig down, if you're casting from deep to shallow, it's going to tend to swing away from that bottom and you won't make as much bottom contact, which is not good if they're eating crawfish or gobies. What you want to do in theory is position your boat into shallower water, cast into deeper water, let it get all the way down to the bottom, then bring it up that rock wall. It will never pendulum away because your line's long enough to progressively make contact with the bottom the whole way up. I do that a lot in the summer, and I do that a lot in November. I will turn it around and fish from deep to shallow in those winter months, but keep it in mind, bottom contact is imperative if they're on bottom bait. If they're eating shad and other stuff, it's not necessarily that important. All right, guys, that's it for Spotted Bass 101. I'm Nick the Informative Fisherman. I greatly appreciate you guys watching. Make sure to check out our Facebook, our Instagram, and InformativeFisherman.com, and we will see you next time. Best of fishing.